Wind-spent pillars of cloud obscured the last rays of the setting sun, an ominous sign of the impending end to years of peace. In 1939, the Republic of Poland faced its greatest challenge yet, a war that would change the course of history of the Polish nation.
Polnische Staat, der entstanden war aus der Blutlast zahlloser deutscher Regimenter. Hat sich dann ausgedehnt auf Kosten alten deutschen Siedlungsgebietes und vor allem auf Kosten jeder Vernunft und jeder wirtschaftlichen Möglichkeit.
Thousands of Polish towns and villages went up in flames. Families were separated. Life was lost in the blink of an eye. Poland found itself in a state of chaos, and Poles had to face extraordinary challenges. While Polish forces rose up with determination and sacrifice in the Warsaw Uprising, some countries that had promised to come to their aid betrayed the Polish nation. The support and arms shipments they had promised never arrived. But for Poles, the most painful betrayal was committed by the Soviet Union, whose forces stood on outskirts of the city, but offered no help as the Germans razed the city. The Warsaw Uprising, a symbol of Poland's struggle for freedom, was betrayed. The abandonment of Poland to the Soviet Union after the war was a stab in the back for the Polish nation. After years of struggle, sacrifice, and suffering, Poland was put to a terrible test, abandoned by her supposed allies. But the treachery and suffering did not break the Polish spirit. Men and women alike fought in the anti-communist underground. These indomitable soldiers were tortured and humiliated. Their bodies were dumped into unmarked graves. Communism in the Polish People's Republic was ultimately dismantled by the Solidarity movement through the Round Table Agreement, the 1989 legislative election, and the Mazzovici administration. The people involved in this process belonged to a wing of Solidarity that favored a policy of gradual evolution over a clean break with communism. The collapse of communism in Poland triggered a wave of major transformations in Europe at the end of the 20th century. The memory of the Second World War and the vast destruction visited upon Poland during the war remain to this day painful chapters in the country's history. The war resulted in the death and injury of millions of Poles. This trauma remains a palpable part of the national memory.
During the Second World War, Poland lost more than 5 million people and a lot of children, and thousands of Polish people were disabled after the war.
Half of them were Polish, were ethnic Poles, half of whom were Polish Jews, 21% of which of Polish personal losses were children under 10. In total, it was 20% of Polish population, pre-war population. So in relation to total eligible population, Polish losses were the highest, I would say, among European countries.
Germany sent away approximately 196,000 Polish children to be subjected to what was known as Germanization. Only 30,000 of them returned home. In occupied Poland, the Nazis created concentration camps and death camps for adults and children. Over 2.1 million Poles were taken away to serve as slave laborers, and German companies profited off this forced labor. Hitler's goal was to eliminate the Polish elite. In Sonderaktion Krakow, a criminal operation targeting Polish intellectuals, 193 professors and other university faculty members were arrested. Many of them later died at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Both Germany and the Soviet Union attempted to eliminate the Polish intelligentsia. The Katyn massacre, which has been an open wound for several generations of Poles, saw the wholesale murder of Poland's military, social and political elites. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, often described as the fourth partition of Poland, was intended to wipe the country off the map. Germans set out to destroy Polish art and culture. The total losses are estimated at $4.7 billion. Poland has not received war reparations from Germany, and attempts to claim compensation in court have been unsuccessful. Germany still has not compensated Poland for the artworks and cultural artifacts looted from the country and its citizens. It is worth noting that the number of stolen and destroyed items is immense, and it is extremely difficult to calculate their exact value. According to some researchers, 510,000 artworks were lost in Poland alone. While some of these items were returned after the end of the war, many remain unaccounted for to this day. Large numbers of artworks and artifacts were also ruined in the war or deliberately destroyed by the Germans. The material and intangible losses to Polish culture and art were immense. Not only did Poland lose artifacts of great financial value, it was deprived of its heritage, which could never be passed on to future generations. Works of art are a crucial part of every country's culture and national identity, and the looting of these treasures has had a lasting and painful impact on Polish society.
Jest rzeczą oczywistą, że to, co zostało zrabowane, powinno zostać oddane. No, my mamy ten problem, że skutkiem dla Polski II wojny światowej rozpętanej przez Niemcy, przy udziale oczywiście Związku Sowieckiego, było nie tylko podbój kraju, ale przede wszystkim jego rabunek, a rabunek również, który miał swój wymiar ekonomiczny w mordach, jakich Niemcy dokonywali.
We lost 50% our territory, and we lost 50% our GDP. Poland was robbed, Poland was exploited. It's 1.3 trillion euro. But we need to remember that this is the very conservative number. But on the other hand, many things depend on the methodology, how we counted the human and material losses. It's very difficult to account what Poland lost in the next decades and next generation.
And that actually is largely the basis for the calculation of the sum of 1.3 trillion euros. If you look at the calculation that I must admit, I don't recommend it. Your eyes may glaze over after about a minute. But if you look at the calculation, it is made very much on the basis of damage to infrastructure, damage to productivity, damage to the environment, damage to the economy.
In September 2022, the Jan Karski Institute of War Losses published its report on the losses sustained by Poland as a result of German aggression and occupation during the Second World War. This milestone document laid the groundwork for fact-based discussions between both parties, with the hope that German authorities will take steps towards justice and historical truth. It was written by 33 researchers and specialists from a range of fields and disciplines, including historians, economic historians, economists, property appraisers, archivists, and lawyers. Selected chapters of the report were additionally submitted to 10 outside reviews, thereby increasing the document's credibility and objectivity. The external reviewers were chosen for their knowledge and expertise, and were qualified to assess the research methodology and the results contained in the report.
The number of 33,100,000 citizens was regained only in 1978. So 33 years took to return to the human potential from before the war.
Enormous effort had to be expended to rebuild the country, effort that could have been spent on its development. If the Second World War had never happened, Poland would be much more developed and economically successful today, and its population would be much larger.
A lot of meetings in the US Congress, in the US Senate, and we working with the US congressmen, and we would like to prepare together in cooperation with the US congressmen a resolution in the US Congress.
This issue still poses one of the most serious challenges in Poland's post-war history.
These days we don't have the legal and binding officially published resignation. So there is no document, no information about that. So it was only public information about the resignation, but there is no binding legal document in Polish official legal system. So I think this issue is absolutely important.
Between 1947 and 1989, Poland made repeated attempts to reach a settlement on German war reparations. Sadly, none of these efforts were successful. The Federal Republic of Germany did not consider itself obligated to repay its terrible debt to the Polish nation. Meanwhile, West Germany's discriminatory laws prevented Polish citizens from seeking compensation on their own. Germany's legal system, in fact, appears to be deliberately designed to avoid paying restitution. The issue of German reparations for Poland remains unresolved purely due to political decisions, not due to legal obstacles or lack of benevolence on the part of the country that started the war. Germany continues to avoid resolving the matter through bilateral agreements. Germany's policy vis-à-vis Poland after the Second World War can be described as one long effort to cover up, delay, and forget.
There are some major doubts that in 1953 Polish government, the Polish communists renounced the reparations because it was under pressure from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union developed then a new political course towards the German Democratic Republic, and the decision, the declaration of the Council of Ministers, of the Polish Council of Ministers, was also against the Polish Constitution from 1952 because such international decisions, declarations were reserved to the Council of State and not for the Council of Ministers. And the declaration only considered the German Democratic Republic, the German Communist State, and not the Federal Republic of Germany.
The total amount of reparations that Poland is claiming from Germany is a conservative amount, and this is worth looking at in a little bit of detail. So all of the methodologies used within the war report are internationally accepted models to arrive at the figures that were arrived at. And if you have a look at the end of the report, the full report, you will see that the amount of reparations claimed is different based on the accepted international model which is used to calculate the amount of reparations. And the amount of reparations being claimed, which is 6.2 trillion zloty, is the lowest possible amount.
The report also provides a basis for an objective public debate in Poland and internationally about Germany's failure to compensate Poland and the Polish nation for the consequences of the Second World War. In the nearly 70 years that have passed since the end of the war, no peace treaty or other bilateral agreement has been signed, resolving the matter of reparations, damages, or compensation for the harm and suffering Poland experienced during the brutal war.
Poland suffered the greatest human and economical losses compared to other European states. I would say the German occupation, Poland was a testing ground for the ideology of National Socialism. Because here Hitler and his collaborators wanted to pursue a politics of total extermination of Polish nation, drainage of economy, looting, total destruction of Polish property, culture, looting of Polish cultural goods, library collections, resources. Also the so-called Operation Intelligentsia, murdering, exterminating of Polish so-called leadership element, teachers, doctors, lawyers, clergy, and other officials, I would say the social political elites of Polish state.
Polish survivors of the Second World War and their descendants have no legal recourse to pursue damages in court, which is unprecedented given developments in international law and human rights. Preventing people from suing for suffering and loss of health is an example of blatant discrimination. After 1945, many of the European countries that suffered losses during the Second World War signed reparation agreements with Germany. The London Agreement, the Paris Peace Treaty, and other agreements were intended to compensate countries for their financial and material losses. Likewise, after the Second World War, Japan signed agreements with China, South Korea, and other invaded countries, promising to compensate them financially and to rehabilitate the victims of its aggression. The Holocaust involved the systematic extermination of millions of people, mostly Jews. After the war, Germany and countries such as Austria, Israel, and the United States took steps to secure reparations for survivors and their descendants. The United Nations strives to ensure accountability for human rights violations in peacetime and in war, and to pursue justice for victims. The organization encourages international dialogue and efforts to settle issues of war reparations. But it's important to note that UN members' stance on war reparations differs depending on the historical and political context. Some countries do not recognize their duty to pay for war losses, and some offer reparations that are insufficient or controversial. Ultimately, whether war reparations are paid or not hinges largely on negotiations between states and on political processes occurring at the global level.
With Greece, it was very much, I think, under Tsipras, the leader of Greece about 5 or 6 years ago, that the question of German reparations became important. Now, there is an explanation for that, which is that Greece felt itself very hard done by Germany in connection with the euro and in connection with dealing with the Greek financial crisis.
In some instances, private individuals have attempted to pursue war reparations from countries. These are typically people who have been personally impacted by a war or other form of cruel violence. Individuals who were pressed into forced labor during the Second World War are one example. In some cases, these victims attempted to pursue damages from the states responsible, especially when the claimants were used as slave laborers, often in inhuman conditions and suffering brutal treatment at the hands of their oppressors. Another example is the pursuit of compensation for property confiscated during the war. Individuals who are deprived of their property or whose property was destroyed in hostilities can attempt to seek redress from the states responsible. These are typically individuals whose property was confiscated or destroyed and who have not received due compensation or restitution. Finally, there are individuals who suffered permanent injury as a result of cruel treatment by the Germans. In their case, pursuing claims from states can be a long and arduous process. They are often required to gather evidence and prove a causal relationship between their injury and the actions of the state. In addition, laws regarding compensation claims differ between countries and legal circumstances. In the past, the law has rarely been on the side of the victims.
W 2010 roku, gdzie pan Natoniewski, osoba ofiary pacyfikacji, spalona twarz, dochodził odszkodowania od państwa, usiłował dojść od państwa niemieckiego za pacyfikację, za uszczerbek na zdrowiu. I Sąd Najwyższy w ten sposób powiedział, ważne zdanie, że na tym etapie jeszcze ewolucji zwyczajowego prawa immunitetu, bo prawo immunitetu jest zwyczajem międzynarodowym, jeszcze nie może zasądzić. Jeszcze państwo niemieckie w 2010 roku korzystało z tejże ochrony immunitetowej, tak? Z tejże ochrony. Natomiast okazało się, że we Włoszech w tym samym czasie sądy najwyższe już tam 2009-2010 orzekały, Niemcy pozwały do Trybunału Sprawiedliwości w Hadze, że przecież jest immunitet zwyczajowy, bo zwyczajowy, że jest. Trybunał w Hadze uznał, że Włochy nie mają prawa i tam nakazał sądom, żeby zmieniły wykładnie i nie łamały immunitetu. Ale w 2014 Trybunał Konstytucyjny włoski powiedział nie. Jest ewolucja już taka, że prawa człowieka są stanowione, są podstawowe prawa, prawo do sądu, do sprawiedliwości, a zbrodnie wojenne nie powinny być immunitetem dla zbrodniarza. I zaczęły się procesy, państwo włoskie mówi, jeżeli chcecie, a porównajmy szkody wyrządzone we Włoszech w tym krótkim okresie, gdy już z osi wystąpiły, do zbrodni polskich. Zapadają wyroki, wysokie kwoty odszkodowania. I jedna tylko jest specyfika, żeby nie drażnić, tak jak tłumaczył Niemców, postanowili płacić z tak zwanego KPO, który dobrze znamy, a więc z KPO. Ale jest nowy premier, pani Meloni, która po pierwsze zaczyna się zastanawiać, a dlaczego. Mało tego, poszedł do Trybunału Konstytucyjnego, poszło pytanie ich, że przepraszam, dlaczego za zbrodnie niemieckie nie ma płacić państwo niemieckie, lecz my sami mamy płacić?
On September the 10th, 1952, in Luxembourg, the Federal Republic of Germany and the State of Israel signed an agreement on war reparations. According to the agreement, Germany would pay Israel a total of nearly 3.5 billion marks, around $830 million at the time, in yearly installments, some of it in the form of goods. Part of the sum, around 450 million marks, or $105 million, would be given to the Claims Conference, an international Jewish organization founded the previous year to aid Holocaust survivors and descendants of the victims, and represent them in negotiations on compensation and property restitution.
There is really a problem because in Germany we had compensation during the 50s, the 60s, and this compensation was open for everyone who was a victim and who lived in Western Europe or in the US, in Israel, but not behind the Iron Curtain, not in Eastern Europe. At some point, the Germans said, well, this compensation is closed.
My nigdy nie zrzekliśmy się jakichkolwiek roszczeń indywidualnych. Mało tego, w umowie zostawiono takie ważne zdanie. Nie pozbawia to osób indywidualnych dochodzenia roszczeń. Tym bardziej, że ta sprawa w Grecji jest aktualna. Ta sprawa we Włoszech jest aktualna. A państwa te kiedyś dostały jakby reparacje.
German government and the German society didn't see this problem, didn't recognize this issue as a problem. So we need to meet and talk about that, how we can solve this problem with the lack of understanding between our countries and our societies. And when you're talking about the history, we need to build cooperation on the true.
And here we go back to one of those narratives which have been very popular and believed over the last 70 years. And we can see in the Twitter sphere, we can see this is a very commonly stated or said thing, that the lands that Poland received were a form of reparations. We have to be very clear about how Poland got those lands. In the process of the Big Three agreements, which ultimately concluded in the Potsdam Agreement.
Joseph Stalin's real but quietly overlooked objective was to permanently push Soviet influence as far west as possible and to establish a Polish-German border that would give rise to misunderstandings between the two countries. This would allow the Soviet Union or Russia to intervene in the role of peacemaker, thereby exerting effective control over Central Europe.
We need to remember and we need to remind that after the war, the big allies, the Big Three, moved Polish borders, Polish territory from the east to the west. And we lost 50% our territory. And what we get on the west, it was lower number of territory that what we lost. So finally we lost 80,000 square kilometers. So this is the now of the Benelux territory or Czech or Austria territories.
The issue at the core of the debate over war reparations is that German society today does not consider itself the heir of Nazi Germany. Poland, which suffered terrible cruelty at the hands of the Nazis, simply cannot accept that stance. To address this discrepancy, Poland has published a report that aims to reopen the debate on this matter. Its authors emphasize that war reparations are not just a financial issue, but a question of moral justice. It is a matter of acknowledging the suffering and losses suffered by Poland as a result of the German invasion and the war.
Człowiek zawsze może być człowiekiem. Nie może stać się zwierzęciem, jak nie chce. Ty decydujesz, kim jesteś.
Many experts point out Germany's actions during the war had an enormous impact on Poland, and that we must not allow that chapter in history to be forgotten. This report marks an important step towards the recognition of these losses and demanding just compensation. War reparations are fundamental to the rebuilding of Polish society and to ensuring that a tragedy like the Second World War never happens again. It is our right and our struggle. We cannot yield on this matter, and so we continue our fight for justice.
We hope that our international efforts will bear fruit and will help us get to the stage where we can sit down and talk with Germany and try to then find some kind of mutually acceptable solution to this historical problem that's gone on for decades.
Formułuje się taką tezę, że niemiecki rozkwit gospodarczy był możliwy dzięki zasileniu gospodarki niemieckiej z planu Marshalla. To nieprawda. Plan Marshalla oczywiście odegrał pewną rolę w odbudowie Niemiec, natomiast nie odegrał roli decydującej. Niemiecka gospodarka, taką jaką dzisiaj znamy, w dużej mierze jest oparta na rabunku, jaki Niemcy przeprowadzały w całej Europie, w dużej mierze również w Polsce. Zasoby wówczas zgromadzone przez Niemców, co jasno również pokazuje raport Mularczyka, na przykład jeżeli chodzi o rabunek środków bankowych, czy złota, czy innych walorów, odbywał się na niesamowitą skalę.
After the Second World War, Poland became under Soviet control, and the Soviet influence dominated the educational and the scientific output of the scientists, the historians, the academics of Poland to produce content, and limited the reach of that content to the wider world. So in the absence of Poland being able to develop its own narrative, talk about its own history about what happened during the Second World War, ultimately it was left to either the Soviets or the Western world to develop their own narratives. So we can say up until 1989, Poland really didn't have a voice. Poland didn't really have a chance to explain its side of the story, what happened to it during the Second World War. The narrative about Poland's involvement in the Second World War is largely negative, that Poland simply rolled over at the beginning of the Second World War, that it capitulated quickly. Very little people know, or in the educational process in the Western world, very few students are taught about what happened in Poland during the Second World War, the struggles that existed, the battles that were fought, the heroes within the Polish army, and so on, so on.
Poland's demand for war reparations has become the subject of international debate. Numerous experts, politicians, and activists from many countries have become involved in efforts to find a solution. Poland's arguments hinge on the principle of justice and Germany's moral obligations to the victims of German aggression for their suffering and losses. Poland emphasizes that reparations are not merely a financial issue. They require the acknowledgement of harm and historical reconciliation.
These days we have a lot of people who survived the Second World War and they are disabled. They lost their health during the war and they don't have the legal channels to seek compensation. They don't have the legal path to the court. And this is, I think, the big problem with the rule of law, the lack of rule of law, that these people don't have the legal channels to seek compensation from Germany.
And there are plenty of people whose parents or grandparents suffered appallingly in Poland, they may very well still be under considerable disadvantages. They may be suffering trauma. They have, I think, at least a very plausible case for some kind of compensation. So those victims are there, and yes, I think that those victims are suffering.
These issues are affecting people today. About 2 million people in Poland are still alive who were alive during the Second World War. That's a huge population, and a lot of those people carry the scars and have harm from, or have experienced harm directly from the Second World War. These people, quite reasonably, want answers and quite reasonably want compensation for what happened to them, which was an illegal conflict which affected innocent victims in Poland.
Niemcy bardzo często lubią i oni w to wierzą, przedstawiać siebie jako to państwo, które ma moralną rację. W Niemczech funkcjonuje takie określenie Aufarbeitung. To jest oznaczenie, że Niemcy przepracowały swoją przeszłość. Wcale jej nie przepracowały. No, jeżeli mówimy o denazyfikacji, to ona dotknęła zaledwie mniej niż 10% ludzi, którzy należeli do NSDAP. Podejrzewam, że około 1%. Zbrodniarze tacy jak Heinz Reinefart, jak Erich von den Bach-Zalewski czy Odilo Globonik, to są ludzie, którzy uniknęli odpowiedzialności. No, część z nich dlatego, że zginęła, ale część dlatego, że nikt ich nie chciał po wojnie ścigać w Niemczech. Wręcz przeciwnie, byli członkami niemieckich elit.
I think the Allies, after 1945, they very soon lost their interest in actually something like persecuting criminals and doing justice, but they very soon figured out that it's more important for them to have Germany, Western Germany, on their side against communism. So it was realpolitik, you know, they were politics of power.
There's another side to this debate. Some claim that the matter of war reparations should be laid to rest, and that Germany should not be held accountable for the crimes of previous generations. It is also argued that Germany has already paid out substantial compensation and officially apologized. The resolution of this debate will be difficult and complicated. It requires compromise and frank dialogue between Poland and Germany. Possible solutions include symbolic monetary compensation, the reconstruction of historical sites, and social and cultural initiatives aimed at education and reconciliation. It is important that the debate be conducted in a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect, keeping in mind that its aim is, above all else, to acknowledge the suffering of the victims and to restore historical justice.
Co jest istotne w kwestii reparacji, to, że Niemcy do tej pory nie podjęły merytorycznej dyskusji z polskim raportem o polskich stratach wojennych, zwanym raportem Mularczyka, z prostego powodu. Ten raport jest druzgocący i pokazujący skalę zbrodni i rabunku Polski.
It's important to have those discussions, because what I see is here in Germany is somehow that, well, the Polish claim for reparations is not taken seriously, and it's not taken seriously in a way that there's a lack of understanding for the Polish losses of World War II. And that's a problem. Western Germany always said, until 1990, reparations is something we do once there is a peace treaty. And the interesting thing is that the Allies never signed a peace treaty. So this was the German legal position, and this is actually a legal position that is accepted by international law.
absence of treaties between Poland and Germany as regards reparations and compensation, the one treaty that does exist is the treaty which establishes in international law the Polish-German boundary. The Germans have stated publicly several times that they will not contest this treaty. Poland have also stated many times that they understand the treaty to be the final word as regards the German borders. So this discussion of potentially giving back Germany their lands misunderstands history and just ignores the fact that the treaty exists. This is established in international law and this won't change.
Summing up the discussions and arguments surrounding Poland's demand for war reparations, several important points can be identified. First, World War II survivors now living in Poland did not receive compensation due to the political situation behind the Iron Curtain at the time. The matter of individual reparations remains relevant and ought to be resolved. The second argument involves the need to achieve human and historical justice through war reparations. Without material compensation, no true reconciliation between Poland and Germany can be reached. Material restitution by Germany for the Second World War, the occupation of Poland, and the atrocities committed there are necessary conditions for full reconciliation. Some believe that it is possible to secure individual reparations for the victims, which would be a first step towards an agreement between Germany and Poland. Many Germans, including lawmakers, are open to the possibility of such reparations, understanding that the victims of Nazism have been cheated and deserve to receive just compensation. Opening a discussion between the victims and Germany is a promising first step. More work and negotiations will be necessary. There is a need for ongoing discussion and efforts to reach a solution that would account for Poland's needs and the financial difficulties of other countries.
I would suspect that sometime in the next 2 or 3 years, there will be a close meeting between the Polish foreign minister and the German foreign minister or the German president. Germany will say, if we give you a few billion or a number of billion euros, will you go away? And I think there will probably be a handshake on it. But that's merely my prediction. And I think there is something to be said for that point of view, that the Germans do probably owe a moral duty to compensate.
Step by step, we'll be changing the position because they don't have any arguments to protect their position. And I think if we will be consistent and our activity will be very precise and effective, we'll change the German government position. And step by step, I have the more and more colleagues to discussion. So I am optimistic that we should looking for bridges between us and try to solve this historical problem for the future.
Historical memory and demands for war reparations have played a significant role in rebuilding relations between countries after the war. In Poland's case, traumatic memories and the experience of German occupation and Nazi atrocities are important grounds for supporting reparation claims. In order to build lasting peace, we must acknowledge the suffering of the victims of the Second World War.
The importance of examining these issues now is because these issues are still open. The Second World War affects every single Polish family today. Everyone is directly affected by the Second World War. As a result, people still want to discuss this. This is an open, raw topic. This is something that clearly the Polish people want to resolve. They want to engage in negotiation and a discussion with the Germans to have a proper, reasonable discussion about how Poles and Poland are affected. It's not a surprise that there is both cross-party support for the resolution back last year and that the Poles consistently support here in Poland that people support the topic of reparations. And the reason is, as I've given, everyone is directly affected. So it's easy for people perhaps to say, these are historical questions, why are we talking about this? And perhaps try to sweep it under the carpet.
We see the conflict in Ukraine, Russia, war in Ukraine, all united worlds see that after the war, Russia should pay reparation, compensation. We're talking about the accountability, Russia accountability. So this situation are very similar because Poland was attacked by German, Poland was occupied by German.
I think it's key how Poland and Germany resolve this difficult historical question and the impact of that on what happens in Ukraine and Russia today. Germany has a perfect chance to set a great example of dealing with historical issues that simply won't go away.
The Committee of Ministers Council of Europe passed a very important resolution about the accountability, about the Ukraine and Russia. And there was a very special sentence on this resolution, that the war crimes are not expired. And we can build justice, we can build a peaceful future only when the aggressor is obliged to pay reparation. So this is the very universal idea, universal for different countries, and especially I think for Russia and Ukraine, and for Poland and Germany. So probably we can use this declaration, very important declaration, because Chancellor Olaf Scholz signed this declaration. We can use this declaration and resolution to our negotiation and our talks with the German government.
The past is more than just writing on the pages of history. It is human emotions and the pursuit of justice deferred. Today we look upon Poland, our homeland, which in the spirit of unwavering dignity has never renounced its demand for justice. Poland did not relinquish its right to reparations in 1953. It is a matter of pride that lives on in our hearts. The time has come to take a step into the future. Germany, which today is an economic and moral superpower, ought to embark on the path of dialogue. We should find the courage in our hearts to face the truth, a truth that heals the wounds of the past and builds bridges between nations.